Maybe you'll be like one Christian that said that he didn't have time to listen to my hour-long video. He had no idea what I said, of course. He didn't care. I haven't watched your video, by the way, that I've...
Recently, a YouTuber by the name of Deconverted Man made a video responding to some of my claims in support of Christianity. So we're going to go over that video together today and break down his points one by one. But I will forewarn you, there's a lot of projection, a lot of borderline ad hominem arguments and generalizations that are made, so brace yourself. Nevertheless, I think this will be very interesting. So let's get right into it. So we'll just go through this video together and hopefully touch on each of his major points, and at the end we'll finish with a conclusion and hopefully put this one to bed. So let's take a look.
Hello, this is Deconverted Man, and I'm writing an open letter to The Outpour, a YouTuber who seems to be doing some apologetics on his channel, at least. Well, he has this one video that's at. Yeah, now it looks like that's what his channel's going to be about. Bunch of shorts, bunch of videos, talking about belief stuff. And, he's trying the thumbnail thing and all that. So it looks like he's attempting to be an apologist. And this is to him.
How cute.
I don't know if you're going to listen. Maybe you'll be like one Christian that said that he didn't have time to listen to my hour-long video. He had no idea what I said, of course. He didn't care. Maybe you're different. I haven't watched your video, by the way,
Great start. Hoping I'm not like the other lazy Christians that don't watch his stuff. Hasn't watched mine, though.
I did note that you wrote something that I commented on. I commented on a number of things, but I want to focus in on this. An appeal to personal credulity is a logical mistake where someone claims a statement's false because they find it hard to imagine, understand, or believe. It relies on personal surprise or lack of imagination instead of real evidence. So, when you said, or when you wrote, rather, this statement down here, you cannot make sense of the world without God. That is an appeal to your personal credulity. You, the outpour, cannot make sense of the world without God. Not me, not others. You, sir, have that problem. This is a you problem, not a me problem. Don't tell me that I cannot make sense of the world without God. That's you. Let's get that clear.
All right, let's stop it there. So his first claim is personal incredulity. He believes that my statement that people can't reasonably make sense of the world without God is a reflection of my own inability to do so. But this objection would only be true if my claim was that I personally cannot make sense of the world without God. Therefore, God is real. But that is not my claim. My claim is that there are elements of reality like teleology and objective truth, laws of logic, morality, nature, cosmology, that we all rely upon that need to be grounded in an adequate foundation that atheism does not offer, but Christianity does. Theism in general goes a lot further in explaining those things than atheism. That's the claim. You might disagree with it, but labeling it as personal incredulity does not answer it.
But that doesn't make it that God is true. It just means you lack imagination or understanding.
So, is he saying that atheists rely upon imagination? Because I don't. I can't imagine or believe anything into existence, nor can you disbelieve anything out of existence. I'm not appealing to imagination. I'm appealing to the evidence, as should we all.
We can make sense of the world, and at no point do we need to appeal to God to do so. But even if it was the case that we could not understand the world at all, that would not mean that God is true. Even if it's the case that the only way that we can make sense of anything is by appealing to God, that would not make God true. What makes the idea true is if it's actually true, and how we know that it's true is through empirical evidence, repeatable tests, sound arguments. One of those things.
All right. Repeatable tests, empirical evidence, sound arguments. Firstly, I'd ask him to define what each of those things are and mean in his perspective, in his view, but that whole claim in and of itself is already riddled with contradictions. Let's talk about that. The very claim that we only know things through empirical evidence and repeatable tests is not itself established by empirical evidence or repeatable tests. It's a philosophical statement, not a scientific discovery, so it's already self-defeating. And notice he keeps using the word true, but he needs to define what he means by true. If it's, for example, something that corresponds to reality, but here's the problem. Empirical testing doesn't create truth. It recognizes and discovers some of what is already true. But this doesn't explain why things were true before we humans ever discovered it. Like 2 + 2 = 4 has always been true well before we ever discovered it. Atheists can't explain why that's the case. They can't explain why the laws of logic and reason exist at all, because those are independent of human existence. There are truths that are independent of us. Christians do have the solution, and it's this. Those truths are grounded in a transcendent mind, namely God. We exist observing those truths. And besides, if we're all just bags of meat and developed bacteria according to atheism, why would you trust any neurological function or deduction that you make? Doesn't really make any sense if it's all random anyway, but let's continue.
And if you have another option to offer, cool, put it on the table and let's see that in action. Now, you also wrote, we have to look at the historical evidence. Greek gods were mythological, so is yours. Your god is as mythological as the other gods. It's just you don't want to accept that label. The Bible is labeled as mythology. It has to be. There's no other way to do that.
Labeled by who and why? By what standard? Big generalizations there with no evidence.
Christ was a real man. No, he was not. He wasn't. That name might attach to somebody, but if you're talking about the Christ that appears in the Judeo-Christian Bible, that character didn't exist and couldn't exist. And there's ample reasons to think that.
Can you offer some reasons, any evidence at all? I mean, just making bold claims here with nothing to back it up yet.
And before you say, well, but historians agree that Jesus existed, which historians agree that? And is that a measure of how we decide what reality is appealing to historians? No. They could all be wrong. But I find that those that have not actually looked into any of this and are just quoting what they've heard will often go to these easy to say quotes, these easy to say lines like this. Oh, he was real. And if you deny that he's real, then you're just silly. No, he wasn't real. And the name isn't even the right name.
He's probably referring to what the Hebrew original name for Jesus was. It's just a translation. It's not that deep.
That walked this earth. God in human flesh, that's an assumption you're making. and there are historical records, extra biblical texts that prove it's true. No, there are no historical records that are extra biblical that prove that Christ walked on the earth and or was God in human flesh. What you have at best are two people that mention people that believe in Christ. Josephus and Tacitus. That's it. And Josephus we have to take with a grain of salt because we know that there was a huge forgery involved with some of Tacitus's writing. If we set that aside, he doesn't prove that Jesus was real. He just references that people believed in Jesus. Tacitus, same thing. Mentions people that believed in Jesus. That doesn't show us that Jesus existed. And both of these people were writing after Jesus was long gone. So that doesn't tell us that the guy existed. The only place that Jesus is mentioned is the Gospels. That's it. After that, the only place and time that you hear Jesus talked about outside of the church is references to people in the church that have this belief. Later, then you have people that reference the Bible and treat it as history. These people are known as Christians. But if you are a historian and you are to examine the Judeo-Christian Bible, you must call it and label it mythology. Why? Because it contains elements of myth in it, i.e., what you call miracles and what I call magic. Because the two words are essentially the same. If this magic can be seen as real, then other writings that contain magic can also be seen as real.
Okay, there's a lot there. So firstly, let me just get this initial assumption out of the way. When he's talking about the historians, how we can't just use them as our standard because they could all be wrong. If they could all be wrong, does that mean we just can't trust any history anymore? Because if that's the case, then you can't even trust the history of science anymore. Your own principles of atheism that are also grounded in history. So let's be realistic. No one being reasonable would ever claim that we can't believe anything from history because historians could be wrong. You have to evaluate the evidence for the specific claims and events, taking into account all of the historical evidence. All right, so he says that Josephus and Tacitus are the only ones that vaguely mention Jesus, and that their writings are only in reference to people that believe in Jesus or that he existed rather than they themselves acknowledging his existence. Well, I want to look at 9 extra-biblical sources that reference Jesus and or the events that surround his life. Let's look at them. Phlegon reportedly wrote about the darkness that occurred after Jesus was crucified. Some argue through the continued writings of Origen that Phlegon even wrote about Jesus' ability to predict future events. Lucian of Samosata described Jesus as a crucified sophist or prophet who introduced new unusual rites and whose followers continued to worship him, regarding themselves as immortal and living as brothers under his laws. Sounds like he acknowledged Jesus' existence to me. Suetonius wrote that Emperor Claudius expelled Jews from Rome because they constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, which is likely a reference to Christ. Thallus is reported by another historian to have, like Phlegon, written about the darkness and earthquakes at the crucifixion of Jesus. Marabar Serapion wrote a letter to his son referencing the unjust execution of a wise king of the Jews. Writing this letter during the lifetime of the eyewitnesses of Christ, he's highly likely to be referencing Jesus. Josephus mentioned Jesus twice in Antiquities of the Jews, providing first-century independent evidence for his existence, ministry, and crucifixion. Celsus wrote an attack on Christianity, argued against the divinity and legitimacy of Jesus, again, obviously acknowledging his existence. And Origen actually ends up refuting Celsus's claims against Christ later on. Pliny the Younger wrote to Emperor Trajan, For guidance in dealing with the early church, he wrote about their singing of hymns, singing them to Christ as to a God. He also wrote of their high moral standards, including vowing not to commit fraud, theft, or adultery. Once again, sounds a lot like the acknowledgement of the existence of Christ. And finally, Tacitus here wrote that Christ, or Christus, was executed by Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. He wrote about the fire of Rome and the poor reputation of Christians at the time, also referencing the crucifixion of Jesus. If you want the citations, Tacitus writes in the Annals, Book 15, Chapter 44. Josephus writes in the Antiquities of the Jews in Book 20, Chapter 9, Section 1, and Book 18, Chapter 3, Section 3. Pliny the Younger writes in Letters, Book 10, Letter 96. Suetonius writes in The Life of Claudius, Chapter 25, Section 4. Lucian of Samosata writes in The Passing of Peregrinus, sections 11 through 13, the letter of Marbar Serapion to his son, etc. You can just look these up in many library databases from several universities if you want to see them yourself. We also have Christian extra-biblical sources that were directly tied to the apostles, like Clement and Ignatius, that are extra-biblical writings as well we can appeal to. But even if we didn't have any extra-biblical sources, which we do, we still have a very, very good reason and compelling case to believe that the Gospels were actually reliable documents. I previously made a couple other videos about the apostles and their writings and the incentive for their writings and their willingness to die for Christ and their account of him. Why would they lie? To be beaten, tortured, and killed? It just doesn't make sense. So, not to mention the fact that their writings are also corroborated by archaeology and other extra-biblical writings. So while some of these extra-biblical sources that are early on don't directly reference Jesus individually, many of them do, some of them just reference the people around him and the events surrounding his ministry, they do provide a very robust historical case for his existence nonetheless. And regardless of that, Deconverted Man's claim that Josephus and Tacitus were the only ones to reference Jesus is historically inaccurate. Those two historians, in conjunction with Lucian and Celsus, alone prove that false. Those four plus the other five listed there, I think, give a very robust case in defense of the existence of Christ, considering that almost all of them, or at least many of them, were alive during the lifetime of the eyewitnesses of Jesus himself. I don't think there's really much of a case to be made here. I don't think any scholar who's being honest will ever debate that claim that Jesus was a real historical figure. And also his claims that the only place Jesus is mentioned is in the Gospels, and that the only time after the Gospels where Jesus is mentioned is when historians reference people in the church that believe in Jesus are quite literally factually wrong, like patently false. And even if those claims were true, it still wouldn't disprove the claims of Christianity. So not only are his claims completely false, they're completely irrelevant to the truth of Christianity, the claims of Christianity. You actually have to refute those themselves. And there's also so many archaeological discoveries that are directly tied to the gospel accounts, like the Caiaphas ossuary, the Pilate inscription, the Alexamenos graffito, and many more. Not to mention the fact that Bart Ehrman, the great skeptic, claims himself that the claim that Jesus was simply made up falters on every ground. The case for Jesus' existence is, in my opinion, overwhelming, and many other scholars as well. To claim otherwise is just a very unpopular opinion. It's a very unpopular take, and it's not compatible with the evidence. So then he claims that if you're a historian and you examine the Judeo-Christian Bible, you must call it and label it mythology, because it contains elements of myth in it, in extent what you call miracles and what I call magic. The two words are essentially the same. That's his claim. Then he says, if these writings that contain magic can be seen as real, then other writings that contain magic can also be seen as real. But let's catch his assumption here. A text is not defined as mythology because there's miracles in it. Mythology is not synonymous with any writing that contains an event that you believe is false or something that you can't understand. The Gospels present themselves as an accurate account of actual history. And just because they contain events and things that you find hard to believe and understand and accept, it doesn't make them false. It doesn't make them myth. And definitionally, magic and miracle do not mean the same thing. Magic is when a person attempts to control supernatural power. A miracle is when God acts according to his own agency and intervenes in a way that does not obey the laws of the universe, which he can do because he created it and is not limited by it. You can disbelieve both, but they are not the same thing. And you're already presuming naturalism anyway, that miracles are impossible, which you've provided no evidence for either. And to rule out a miracle, you'd have to do one of three things. Either you'd have to prove God does not exist, which you can't. You'd have to prove that God cannot act within his own creation, which you can't. And then, by extension, prove that miracles are logically impossible, which you can't. Or even prove that the evidence of the particular miracle is inadequate, which no one has ever been able to definitively accomplish in history. Ever. And just because other historical religions cite miraculous occurrences, it doesn't mean that Christians have to equally accept those as true because we believe in miracles. Every miracle claim should be evaluated individually, and whichever one has the most robust historical case and evidential case should be favored. That's why we don't acknowledge the Greek pantheon anymore, because the historical case and evidential case is severely lacking. To claim that because Christianity and the Greeks both cited the miraculous or miracles, that they're evidentially equal is a non sequitur. But let's continue.
Zeus was written about by lots of people. So how do you know he's a myth? Because you believe he's a myth. Why do you believe he's a myth? Because you weren't told that he was real. You weren't raised believing he was real. You haven't spent time and energy invested in thinking that he was real. But plenty of people did, and plenty of people believed that he was real back in those days. And plenty of people wrote about Zeus and made plays about him and spoke about him and maybe even sang songs about him and maybe even worshiped him and prayed to him, because they believed that it was real, and your deity is no more real than that. How do we know that? Because we can actually examine history, which you have not done. And I know you haven't done it, because if you had, you wouldn't say what you said here. His death on the cross and the resurrection is not covered in anything other than the Bible.
So remember, we covered that with the extra biblical sources, that was referenced by people that weren't even Christians, historically. Okay, so here he makes another assumption. The only reason I don't believe in Zeus is because I wasn't raised to or told to believe that. And, classic atheist argument, you believe because you were told to do so. He's insinuating that I only believe that Christ is God, and I believe in Christianity because I was raised to believe it, not because of any evidence. But he's also insinuating that the evidence for Jesus is no better than the evidence for the Greek pantheon, which historically is completely inaccurate. No informed, serious historian or scholar would ever argue that. He also states that he knows I've never examined history because of my claims. I might not be a professional historian, but to assume that I've never investigated any history of my own faith? So these assumptions are completely ad hominem, unfounded, and devoid of any evidence. They don't deal with any of the claims of Christianity anyway. And as I said before, our beliefs don't even dictate reality. It doesn't matter who believes what. It matters what's true. And he has to deal with that reality as well. I could make the same assumptions about atheism that he's making about Christianity. You disbelieve because you don't want it to be true. You were raised to disbelieve. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm assuming it's not true because of your name, Deconverted Man. That refutation still doesn't work. It isn't evidence. It doesn't deal with the claims, any of the claims of Christianity itself. And you're entitled to that observation. You can believe that it influenced the way I came to faith. But even if that's true, and I was raised into Christianity, I can still be raised into something true. You still have to deal with the claims of Christianity. So these arguments are completely irrelevant.
The outpour, you don't have evidence of God. You don't have any tests that we can run on God. You don't have anything to offer us other than what other apologists have already done, which is appeals to arguments that are unsound.
Okay, so he's doing the same thing here as he did earlier. He's assuming scientism, but the claims he's making are not scientifically testable. You can't test logic, morality, human rights, beauty, any of that scientifically, but we all know they exist. And even if I do use arguments that have been used by many apologists already, it doesn't make the arguments false. That's why they use them. Again, just do the work, provide the evidence, refute the actual claims, don't make rash generalizations and assumptions, especially about the person you're talking to. And the entirety of the rest of the video, for the most part, is just him making assumptions about me, about my research and my education, and a bunch of ad hominem attacks that are really unfounded and generalized. He asks some other questions and insists that I don't know the answers to them, even though he's never heard me answer them before. He could just watch my other videos and do some research. The remaining claims he makes are answered in other videos of mine or just by simply Googling whatever those questions are. So honestly, I think it's pretty clear this video is just one long emotional appeal, emotional objections, rash generalizations, assumptions, misinformed takes, ad hominem attacks, all without citations, all without any actual evidence, no quotations, no historical records, just a bunch of bold claims with no foundation. But here's the thing, this is just one skeptic in a long line of them that have been trying to disprove Christianity for millennia throughout history. They've never been able to do it because there's an answer for every single objection you make against Christianity. I love this quote by Robert Jastrow, and we'll finish with this. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. And to Deconverted Man, I really do appreciate you making the video, and thank you for engaging with me. And I do enjoy this stuff. I believe that conversations can be had, even in disagreement, undergirded by love and can be done amicably. So I hope this helps clarify what we as Christians actually do believe. To all the skeptics watching and the believers as well, I hope this video has blessed you abundantly. Let's remember to keep these engagements respectful if we do it in the comment section and as much as we can in our fallen nature, and to undergird all of what we say in love, especially you believers. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the new content coming out very soon. It also supports the channel and helps us keep doing what we love to do here at The Outpour. God bless, and I'll see you soon.